Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We have a guest from Architecture Department today, Professor Dr. Ayşen SAVAŞ, and she will talk about architecture for museums. Now, I will ask her kindly introduce herself to us. Thank you very much.
With myself. I'm a graduate of this university, Faculty of Architecture. Then I completed my master's degree in 1.5 years, which was not very usual for our department at that time, on rehabilitation of historical sites, transforming historical buildings for cultural purposes. That's what I did for the customs buildings in Istanbul, Izmir. Then I got a scholarship from British Council and I went to London and I completed another master's degree in London University. Then I went to MIT and I completed my PhD there on the theory of museums and representation. The museums are my tools. I'm designing museums. That's a big opportunity for me. But what I'm specifically interested in is representation theories, which are highly based on post-structuralist discourse. Post-structuralist discourse is related with linguistic theories, it's related with art theory, and it's also related with historiography. Historiography meaning writing history in a linear way, or talking about shifts. I'm talking about philosophers like Foucault, I'm talking about philosophers like Adorno. I'm not going to bore you with those. My presentation is going to be highly visual, and I'm working on visual culture, so it's going to be on architecture. But just to give you a background, what we do with my research group is not only to design a museum, but also establish an institution. So from the mission to the statement, to the vision of the institution, we establish a museum and write the architectural program and then design it. Architecture for museums is not a field in itself, but it's very popular because if you are a country, a government who wants to make an investment on your representation, the best budget goes to museums. And that's where architects, we find our freedom, because we are always restricted with economy, we are always restricted with the politics of the country. But museums allow us to be experimental, museums allow us to do whatever we want to do. So the methods in writing history, historiography, the politics of a country, and the philosophy of a society, they all have influence on the establishment of these institutions, which were in 19th century influenced from the nationalistic movements of this identity crisis of the European countries. I have a series of visual documentation, if you like. Please feel free to interrupt me, because I don't like this monologues, because this field also is very interactive. Museums are also very interactive. We can go back and forth, if you like, to make it clear for you. I have put Mnemosyne here. Mnemosyne is the wife of Zeus. She is the mother of 9 muses, including the muse of history, Clio, for example, or muse of theater. Theater and history are important because these are narrative institutions, and they're based on verbal and visual expressions. So, and it plays between scientific and artistic. So these two values pushes us backwards, back in history to, before the Enlightenment and maybe before the Christ, where history and mythology was mixed, where astronomy and architecture, a high rank of listeners I have, mixed. So I like Mnemosyne just for this reason. It's very hard to draw the demarcation line, that's a Kantian term, between the scientific and the more mythological aspects of this field. She is also talented. She is the mother of talent, and she is the mother of wisdom. She is the mother of enlightened wisdom. kadar mı ışıklar kapatılıyor?
Bir saniye hocam.
Maybe you will sleep, but because it's visual, it's better to see the illustrations if we can. Giovanni Panini, he's a painter. He's a Renaissance painter, Enlightenment painter. What he paints is the genesis of emergence of these institutions, museums, if you like. What you see here is a collection of fragments, but fragments sometimes can be buildings themselves. Colosseum, and many buildings that you would recognize, Pantheon. Besides that, fragments of sculptures and fragments of written documents, they all come together in a single space, and these gentlemen over there, connoisseurs as we call them, they try to understand, they try to locate these displaced objects in a historical context. That's what museums do, basically. This is not a pure illustration. This is not only an imaginary illustration. That's sort of a reality, because in the 17th century and 18th century, mostly Europeans, mostly British actually, they came to Turkey and Italy and Spain, and they went far to Egypt and China to collect information, but information was based on the objects. They were actually, literally, taking the object to their countries. And these objects could be fragments of a whole theater, like in Berlin, you know, we have pieces of architecture that borrowed, I should say borrowed from our country, permanently borrowed. And there are, it doesn't have to be related with art and architecture. They collect all the specimens, fossils, and all the material, bones, animal leftovers. They collect all these things and bring home. And what they do afterwards is the modern thought. It's the beginning of modernity. And that's why I like these institutions. These are the only modernist institutions in the world, because they are post-Enlightenment, they are post-Italian Renaissance, so they are modernist institutions with ideology and with specimens inside. This is another illustration, and when you zoom into these, capriccios they are called, when you zoom into these paintings, you will see further fractals, if you like, of the same image over and over again. So this is, Panini's paintings have been considered as the best illustration of the birth of museums in the world. These Vendues, these capriccios, they are called, are interesting because because these objects and specimens are displaced already, they are cut from their historical and geographical context, and they are brought together in a very manierist way. I mean, there is no reason for them to be together if you don't tell a story about them, if there is no narration behind them, if there is no rhetoric behind them, there is no meaning for them to be together. And these narrators, if you like, they tell stories about these objects. What I find fascinating about this is when you closely look at the dresses and clothing of these people, some of them are from 80 BC, from way behind. Some of them are from Renaissance and some of them from 19th century. So this juxtaposition of time, juxtaposition of place, and juxtaposition of narrations make museums very interesting, actually, architectural works. Again, I'm not going to go into details of these objects, I should say, but they are the very well-known examples of architecture around the world, mostly from Italy, obviously. These collections of unrelated and displaced objects and rooms, literally rooms, are called nadide odaları, curiosity cabinets. And these curious people are the genesis of modern taxonomy. They did classifications, they put things in order. I'm again referring to Foucault and social philosophers of post-structuralism. This linear flow of history and historicism, the consciousness of history, is very young. 300 years ago, using a 3000 BC bowl next to a contemporary bowl was not a sin. It was not a crime, because they didn't have the notion of rarity or significance of a historical object. That's why we opened our borders and sent our architectural values and artistic values to Europe, because we didn't have that consciousness. It's not only us, but humanity didn't have this consciousness. And it is just 250 years old, which is very, when you think about humanity, it's a very short span of time. So as I said, they brought everything. These are very important people, and these are the founders of very interesting museums in Europe. First museums, if you like, of Europe are these just gentlemen. These are just curiousies, collecting, as I said, all sorts of unrelated elements again. And what they do, they classify them. They classify and they put them in order. This is the first museum in America, Philadelphia Museum, Charles Field again. And this is Ashmole, Ashmolean Museum. It's the most important museum in museology. Whenever there is something new, whenever there is a revolution, it always comes from Oxford in museology. They are very conservative and very creative at the same time. So we learn from them. And Elias Ashmole is the collector. His collection was transformed into the museum, and it's a university museum, belongs to the university. So, as you see, the first museums are not very different than the curiosity cabinets. They are larger rooms, if you like, and they transform into larger, larger rooms to include all the specimens of the world, all the examples of the world. I like this Nicelius. He is again a British gentleman. This is the first museum guide, first museum guide in the world. It's an imaginary museum again. It's not a real museum. But what he does is very interesting. He not only classifies the written documents and the specimens like animal bones or gems or ring stones, and logic and algebra and mathematics, but also he places a table and he picks them up and he works on them. This is the beginning of scientific research. That's the beginning of thinking, bringing many interdisciplinary areas together to think about, what is the origin of humanity, because you lost your God in the 16th century. What is the origin? You start seeking for the origins of things. Where did I come from? Where did the first sculpture come from? When was the first architecture? Where was the first architecture? So they try to find the origins of things in 18th century. And that reached to a huge scale. These are the beginnings of London University. These are the beginnings of very well-known European universities in the world. And that was the time where Europeans, again, scholars were writing encyclopedias. And when you think about it, establishing and classifying and making taxonomies of objects in a museum is not very different than writing a dictionary, because you have to abstract things like mathematics, like algebra, like animal bones. So you have to abstract these things under certain titles and place them. In architecture, for example, in these encyclopedias were listed under geometry, under perspective, and then architecture. So it's very interesting to trace the location of architecture in dictionaries to understand the significance of the discipline, my discipline at least, was always under the shadow of geometry and mathematics. It still is today. We are dealing with parametric design, and we came back to our roots, and we are still now dealing with mathematics once again. And these are further taxonomies in encyclopedias, and I worked on these encyclopedias for 2 years with scholarship. There are some people, like Lenoir, during the vandalism in the French Revolution, because everything was falling apart, because they were all in streets like today, happening in Syria, happened in Iraq. So they are breaking history to cut the relationship with the history. The same thing happened before the French Revolution, and Renoir saved these objects and facades of the buildings and whatever he can collect. Ironically enough, in a religious building again, in a monastery, later transformed into École des Beaux-Arts. That was the building of École des Beaux-Arts. It's a very important school for designers, for us. École des Beaux-Arts and Bauhaus are two schools of thought which actually orients the educational system and curriculums of architecture. So this is Renoir's collection, then became Louvre Museum. So it's in Paris, it's transformed itself to Louvre Museum. This is the Egyptian wing. Just to show you the amount of object that the church, pope, and the aristocracy held in their hands, and they were returned to public. This is another reason why I like museums, because they are public institutions. They transform individual wealth into a public institution. The third reason I like why I like museums is they are non-profit institutions. They are by definition cannot make profit. It's for public good, like our universities. It's a public space. So Hubert Robert is another painter who depicts these scenes. That's the establishment of Louvre. And if you see in his previous drawings, because Louvre also is affected highly from vandalism and wars, there are no glasses and nothing, and you see Rembrandts and Bernini's, all sorts of artist paintings without any roof on them, without any ventilation on them. This is the Louvre. And obviously, the relationship between the art objects, they are not like shrines. You can touch them, you can play with them, because they don't have this mentality of preserving them to eternity, because that's what museums do. Museums save knowledge and objects to eternity. If you want to know about more of these, because I'm not going to go into details, there are 3 books that I suggest, if you have time over the summer, you can read. Tony Bennett, he came to Metu, and you can read the Curiosity Cabinets. And Alien Hooper Greenhill, Australia is very important in museology, like film production. I don't know whether you have seen Australian films, but they are very good films. They are very good directors. I don't know why. It's a very interesting island. And in museology, again, they are very creative in their narrations. Again, so she's one of them. In Turkey, when they show, the name should not fool you, she's Turkish, and she wrote extensively about museology in Turkey. That's her PhD. And Ali Artun, maybe you don't know him, but he is the founder of Galeri Nev. That was the first art gallery in Turkey, maybe, in Ankara. It moved to Galeri Nev, I don't know whether you know it or not. It's a little place, but it's a very important place that set the taste in art in Turkey, most probably. Ali Artun is the founder of it, and he started a series from Letişin Yayınları on museum and museology, so you can find information. This is the book I published after I designed Sabancı Museum in Istanbul. That also can give you an idea of what I am doing with you. And I have published, I'm not only doing museums, so you can find publications. This is Ankara Kalesi. This is our citadel, the walls of Ankara Kalesi, and these are called spolias. Spolia is the actually devşirme taş. They are gathered from all around. These Roman tomb pieces and sculptures. They are used as regular stones in Ankara castle. If you go there, you can see them. When the show sees this as the first museological interpretation in Turkey because you're protecting them and you're displaying them. So this is the birth of museology for her. And I like the idea because it's Ankara, it's good. It's not in Istanbul. So it's a very good proposal. Obviously, Ottoman Empire was not alien to the museology and museum. They knew that in 19th century and 18th century things are happening in Europe. They went to Europe. And they knew that they had the gifts in the royal treasury, Hazine-i Hümayun. They had all sorts of gifts from China. In fact, if you go to Topkapı Palace, you can see these objects. 4 of them, I saw them. They are there in display. So, you know, these miniatures, they tell the truth. It's a true story. And all the objects, very rare objects from all around the world, were given as a gift of Sultan, and they are kept in the palaces, and now they are transformed into museums, and you can see these objects there. And Ottoman Empire participated in the World Expo. It's very important World Expos. For example, Germany became Germany because of one of the World Expos in Chicago, 1893. They realized that they are way behind industrialization, and they are way behind in America, and they gathered 8 architects to change the society. And Werkbund, the industrialization of Germany, was actually, it was born in one of these expos. And we were always next to Greece, our location, until last year, this year. We are not participating in the expo anymore. I don't know why, but our government decided not to participate in the Milan Expo. That's a very bad decision. But this is a very lively environment for the exchange of knowledge. This is our first museum, known museum. It is Aya Irini. It's the first gate of Topkapı Palace. And they kept armory, and they kept the golden horns chains. Halici Kapı'dan zincirler, they were also displayed here. So it's a very nice building. If you have the time, you should go there. It's a beautiful concert hall now. And Osman Hamdi Bey, he is the first educated Minister of Culture, maybe, of this country. He established this museum, archaeological museum in Topkapı Palace. If you haven't been there, I encourage you to go there. And please visit the library. Library is a museum. They may transform it into a hotel, you know, in 2 years. Just go and see these things. They are very important. And Osman Hamdi Bey was a very, well, his father as well was a Pasha, and he was trained in France. That explains why this building is a European neoclassical building. But the Syrian tombs that he wrote were displayed first here, and now they have the wonderful collection, and they are very good in museology, so it's worth seeing. Another turning point in Turkish museology is the Republic, establishment of Republic, obviously, and after 1923, all these palaces and religious buildings like Ayasofya, Mevlana, they were all transformed into museums, and the wealth was transformed to public, like the French Revolution, actually. It was a revolution anyway. That was Turkish Revolution. And the end of our revolution was transforming all these Sultan palaces. The palaces were given back to public. That was a big move, ideological move as well, and that was the support given by Atatürk to these knowledge institutions. And this is the work I did with British Council when I came back from MIT in 1995. And we have only one university museum in Turkey, and we had, you know, very few fine arts museums, and the numbers were very depressing when I came here, and I didn't know why I did my PhD on this subject. But after 5 years, this field boomed, and now I'm very happy because I give this talk all around, and the number of the private museums increase every day. We have over 500 archaeological museums now. It's a big event. Wherever you go, you find a museum in Turkey. When were you born? I don't know. When were you born? 1990. Ne zaman doğdunuz? 89. All right, you still, you know, you can still, but my students, for example, they don't know these times, but in 1984, in 1985, really, museology is not a, museums were the most boring places ever. We would never go there, and it was a torture to be there, but now it became a field research. Things are happening very rapidly. I don't know whether you know this or not, but Topkapı Palace has the daily ticket income of Topkapı Palace in a good month is more than 50,000 euros. So it's a big income for the government. And that was passed to Tepe Holding because of the privatization of all these governmental institutions. They gave it to a private entrepreneur, I have to say. It's a very clever investment on their side. They now are responsible from the gift shops and entrances of these museums. They do a good job actually, but the money goes to them, obviously, it happens. This is the first museum I have designed. I spent usually 5 years on one museum because, as I said, I don't only design it, I established the institution, I train people, I change the legal system, so it's very painstaking. But SAVAŞ Museum was my first baby, if you like the expression. It was, again, a collection, a private collection transformed into a public institution. That was the little house, I mean little, relatively, house that SAVAŞ family lived. Architecturally it's not a valuable, very valuable historical thing, but the koru, the garden was very important, obviously. It's a natural heritage for us. So we tried to protect the environment around the house. We basically did underground galleries, added them. And the underground, there was a pool for the handicapped child of the SAVAŞ family. So we transformed the pool into pool gallery. That's what we are seeing here. And you cannot see anything above the ground. And it is a very flexible space. You can transform the space into different environments, if you like, just by painting, just by using a little bit of technology. They have been doing a great job there. This is the other museum we have designed with my assistants and students. That's we did it with sponsorship. This is our Science and Technology Museum here. When we started these things, I cannot call them buildings, we didn't have a collection. And I said, if you don't have a collection, you don't build a building. First you collect things, then you know what you're going to be putting in, then you build the building. And there was a proposal, we stopped the proposal of a famous architect, and we said we are going to make a storage, a container first, display the objects, collect them, then build the building. But they liked, the community at Metro liked the storage building, and they decided to keep it as a museum. This is a tensile structure. We didn't want to do any harm to the ground, so we just pulled it above the ground. I like this sazlar, I don't know how to call them in English. I like this wild landscape, so I wanted to put these. There's no water inside, there's nothing, it's just a real container. But Metro did not want to spend much time on it because we have a limited budget. So we didn't want to maintaining costs, we want to make it as low as possible. So this is titanium zinc. This is the first time we use titanium zinc, so you don't paint. When it rains, it washes itself. It's a beautiful thing. And we use ceramic painting on the poles, tensile poles, so you don't paint those either. So it's good. Then they decided to make a pool on the side. They made landscaping, and it's just out of hand now. I'm not going there too much, but it changes abstract character now. It's really a museum, but it was a good beginning, I think. This was the restaurant and the gift shop, and the information desk was going to be here, and this was the storage and display. We stole these things from institutions. We brought them at midnight, and it took 5 years, but it was very good 5 years for me. I learned a lot. This is another museum that we have designed. Maybe you don't know. You don't know because I don't register them as museums. Because once you register them as museums, then government owns the land and TEPE owns the building. So just because we learn that very fast, we don't register them as museums. It's just a little trick. But it is a museum, and it's the birthplace of Turkish industrialization. And these are the best educated engineers ever. I don't know whether you know this institution or not, but it's a very valuable, still is, brilliant people, brilliant managers, if you like. And we transformed an old military kışla yapısı into a factory they transformed, and that factory we transformed into a museum. It's in Tandon. If you're interested, you can go and visit that. And this is the last museum. The opening was 2 days ago. It's in the Stadal of Ankara. It's not just next to Anadolu Medeniyet Müzesi, Anadolu Civilization Museum. I spent another 4 years on this. This is another baby. But I think this is getting better. I'm getting better. This is okay, and I hopefully, the 5th museum is going to be the right museum, and it's in very good hands. Again, he's a private collector. Again, he's collecting just to protect these objects, and again, he gave it to public. So that's why we support. And he transformed these 3 modest houses in the Citadel of Ankara into a museum. He also saved the environment. I think he did a great job, and he paid for this, and he gave it back to the government. It's a very big gesture that they made. This is the first part of the lecture. I know I still have time. If you are not bored, I can go to another section. If you are bored, you are not yet. All right. I'll show you. This is just an introduction to what I do. I'm not going to show everything, but as I said, I'm going to talk about museum architecture, and I'll show you some interesting buildings. Sorry for the languages, they are all Turkish anyway. But what it says is museum is a building type, but it doesn't have a typology. That means you can recognize a school where you go. You can recognize a hospital, but you can never recognize a museum. If it's a very wild building, you may think that it should be a museum, but that's what it is. And ICOM, International Confederation of Museums, is a very active cultural institution. I'm a board member. They selected me as a board member without me knowing it, so they found me. They are very interesting people, I have to say. Because of them, I'm just spending a wonderful time in the palaces and museums, and I'm going to the storage spaces of Louvre, and this is a wonderful opportunity for me to become a member of this board. This museum changed the life of an unknown town, Basque town in Bilbao. Nobody knew Bilbao before this museum. It's a Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. Obviously, it's not just a museum. They did a big urban renovation project in Bilbao. But it became public. The media recognized the museum. And this is titanium zinc. That's where I learned titanium zinc from Frank Gehry. This was the first time it was used. Teneke basically, but it's a good teneke. And this is another tin can. This is also a museum. It's a university museum. When I was establishing with our former rector Ural Akbulut, this was the model we have took Nemo. It's in Netherlands. It's a beautiful place run by donors, run by instructors basically and students. It's a public enterprise. It's a very interesting organization. It's a beautiful place. You can use a terrace for concerts and things. If you happen to go there, it's free. The entrance is free. It's a beautiful place. Nemo is here. And this is the Maritime Museum, and this is the Architectural Museum, the small thing next to it in Amsterdam. And this is ours. You have seen it. Those were the models for me. I saw them before I started designing this one. And sometimes you design a brand new building. Sometimes you transform a building. I usually transform buildings into museums. I don't, that's what I believe in recycling. Tate Modern is one of them. It's a power plant transformed into a museum. It's a very popular museum now. And this bridge is the Millennium Bridge designed by Calatrava. He's an engineer interested in art and architecture. And the building, Tate, is very interesting because it's a huge space and they play with the space. They do experimental art in this space. As I said, it has no typology. This is one of the museums that I like most. If you ever go to Amasra, please go and have a cup of tea in the garden because you sit on the sculptures and you have your tea by the sea. It's a beautiful place, and the director has joined all the seminars I have given. He didn't speak a word of English, but he made me translate everything, and he just did a master's, I have to say, on this, and he changed the whole display environment, and he's a very brilliant person. And they are scaleless. Egypt, unfortunately, because of this social turmoil, they had to stop the project, but they are building the largest museum in the world, 18,000 square meters. This is just to give you an idea about the dimensions. This is the Getty Museum, one of the largest museums in the world, in Los Angeles, 76,000 square meters. Louvre is 90, Bilbao is 24, and Sabancı is 6,000. Sabancı is just the entrance of Louvre. It's just the ticket booths of Louvre. And but the dimensions is not important. What is more important is how you reach the public and who brings Picasso. If you bring Picasso to a country, if you bring original paint to a country, that makes you very significant as your museum. We did bring Picasso to Sabancı Museum because all the infrastructure, mechanical equipment in it was designed accordingly. We have humidity control, we have dust control, we have insect control, we have all sorts of chemical hazardous control. And I was trained on this for 2 years at Getty, so I learned how to do this. And one of my Okutan Mühendislik, I don't know whether you know them or not, his son, Mehmet Okudan, went to MIT. He was an engineer, a graduate of our mechanical department. He went to MIT to complete a degree in architecture, and he became an expert on physiology. So with them, we do these infrastructural projects. As I said, you can convert these buildings into exhibition, display environments, or you build brand new spaces. The birthplace of our Science and Technology Museum is our tennis courts. Maybe John will remember. 2003, we made an exhibition for 1 month, and it stayed for 7 months. Every day, 750 people visited it, and we collected all the materials from our alumni just because of that exhibition. This one. This is our tennis court, and we converted it into a display. And we didn't have any money. We had zero budget for this. We use old rugs and we use photocopy posters, and I designed these kutu profilleri, halojen lambalar falan. These are what we did. But it was very successful, and we managed to collect many things with this exhibition. And this is one of the most expensive museums in the world, in Doha. I don't know, do you know anything about Doha or not, but the European firms are designing Doha now, and it's a huge investment and best architecture, if you like, of the world. is now in Doha, and they have amazing collections. They have amazing buildings and architects working for them. Zaha Hadid, Jean Nouvel, Richard Meyer, they are all known architects, and they are building there now. And they're gathering all sorts of collections from everywhere in the world. This is Aliyev Museum. I was one of the consultants of that museum as well. This is an exceptional project. It's completed now, it's open. But they don't know what to display because they don't have a collection. And I was fired from this group because I wrote a report saying that you should not invest that money on this building because you don't have a collection. So they didn't invite me again. But they have a building. They have a library, they don't have books. They have a museum, they don't have books. But they might because they have neft, they have oil, so they have a collection. These leftover museums I love a lot. They are mostly in Russia, former Russia. And these are very interesting concrete experiments, if you like, in their time. They are just left empty like this. And this is again, if you want to know more about museum architecture, there are very good books. They are coffee table books in a way. It's nice to look at, and it's nice to flip the pages and look at them if you want. You can read. I have a good collection of these books. I'm not going to bore you with these, but I'm going to maybe just a little bit talk about the Getty Museum. Paul Getty, you know, is the petrol kralı of America. He has a wonderful collection, and he has a wonderful museum. But besides the museum, for every art collection or architectural collection or historical collection, there has to be a research behind it. There has to be an idea, a mission behind it. And this, their mission was the conservation labs. And so they have the best conservation labs of the world. And their target group was Egypt. And they were, I worked very hard to make Turkey as a target group, but they said we are too rich to demand free help from Getty. And Egypt, I'm glad that they did. Egypt got it, and they do the restoration of the object. It's a very interesting field. It's a beautiful place at the hill. You can see the ocean, wonderful. I worked there for a while. It's a beautiful place. But what I try to say is just making a display exhibition hall is not enough for a museum to be. There has to be something, a research behind. That's why I promote university museums, because there's always a possibility of research going into the museum. So it's a big space. It has a tramway, it has plazas, it has I think 17 different restaurants, it has scholars wing, so it has all sorts of things. And it has grants if you want to apply. Our country has a good reputation, our students, so if you're interested, if you're in the chemistry department, if you're interested in material technologies, they give grants to different interdisciplinary museums. Maybe one last thing that I can say, for a single museum to live, it's very hard, but in Europe they managed to make museum districts. And now we have established one in Istanbul, Tarihi Yarımada, Historical Peninsula. It's going to be a museum. It's a UNESCO listed field. But most important ones are in London and in Berlin. In Berlin, there is the Museum Island, and it takes 5 days to see all the museums in it. But David Chipperfield, the architect, he was in Istanbul a couple of days ago. He designed it. He's a very good designer. And they connected all the museums from underground. So it's a very big project. And some metro stations in Europe, they transformed themselves into the first display areas of museums, like Louvre. And when you go to subway, bus, you can never miss these. It's very important to make it part of your daily life. Hopefully, this will happen for Turkish museums as well one day. and Bilbao again. That's what I'm talking about. There is a bus stop in this complex system. When you see the Louvre Museum, it's at the center of everything. It's part of the daily life. This is Getty. Where is Getty? This is Los Angeles, obviously. That's the scale of Los Angeles. And this is where Getty is, on the top of the hill. And this is the tramway. You leave your car, you take the tram, you go up in the hill. And this is, you have seen those already. Accessibility to the museum. This is very important. For example, for Bilbao, it's a node connecting 3 neighborhoods in Bilbao. There are different squares at different levels, and that connects all the neighborhoods. And then it has, I think, 16 or 17 different entrances that we can, to go from one neighborhood to the other, the shortcut is through the museum. So you have to go through the museum. And in many European countries, museums are free. In England, they're all free. In France, some of them are free, and every year we take our students every other year to one of these museums. You see, it's a big structure. There's a highway passing through the museum. It's not a small thing, it's huge. It's the scale. And the tramway stops at the museum. That's the last stop. So this is a dream of architects. We try to build an infinite museum because the more you have, the less space you have, and there's always a shortage of space. And the whole effort goes to the idea of gaining space and preserving space. Le Corbusier is one of our masters, and this is a museum, infinite museum. With every painting you add a wall surface. That's his idea, and he managed to build it in Japan, but it's limited, obviously. And the problem is, this is our locomotive. This is the one we have. Sometimes you have very big objects. Sometimes you have very small objects. So sometimes you have to bring very small objects next to big objects. It's a very, challenging project for architects. That's why I like museums again. And as I said, it's not stopped with the display halls. You have restaurants. This is Tate, very expensive. This is Naïef Kunststoel in Netherlands, very cheap. This is RIBA, Royal Institute of British Architects. They serve with silver and pure crystal, and it's extremely cheap. It's for architects, it's part of the training. For architecture students, it's very, very cheap. It's cheaper than Uludağ restaurant. That's what they try to do. They have wonderful bookstores, always the best bookstores in the museums, always the best gift shops. It's not only consumption, but also provides knowledge to people. That's the idea behind the gift shops. And what you don't see behind is also very interesting. All the storage spaces, all the specifications of the storage spaces, and very interesting people. I work with them. He's a volunteer. He was finding photographs of architecture at RIBA when I was a student, a fellow there. I worked there for 3 months to understand how to store photography. It disappears, photographs disappear basically. So the chemistry of that, and this gentleman, I learned a lot from him. So you meet very interesting people in the museums too. And labs, obviously. This is the frame lab of Getty. This is the painting lab of Getty. I consider myself very lucky to be there as well. It's a big, as I said, opportunity. How to pack objects, how to open cases, how to touch them, how to not to touch them. These are things that I learned. And as I said, infrastructure is very important. This is SAVAŞ's infrastructure. They spend a lot of money for that, but I think it's worth it because it pays back now. Because Istanbul is very humid, it's very hard to maintain humidity. So this is the pragmatics of it. We start from historiography and ended in mechanics, and that's it. Thank you. Soru yok diye anladım.
Thank you for the presentation. For example, your presentation is almost based on the information of the European museums.
Yes.
What about, first question is, what's the effect of the religion of, gathering of all these pieces from other countries? And another question is, how about doing these things in East Asia and North countries? For example, China, Nepal, Bolivia, South Mexico.
Okay, you can say that, for example, when it comes to architecture, seeking the origins of architecture in Greek and Roman architecture, European architecture can be a big mistake. Like Edward Said would say, the beginnings can be from India, the beginnings can be from China, which is a settled civilization for 5,000 years. So China, when you become a silk textile producer, your father, your grandfather of your grandfather, they were all silk producers. So the perfection of the craft is obviously very important. When it comes to enlightenment, modernism, and the institutions of that, which is museums, obviously you are limited with the knowledge behind it generated from Europe. This is European, it's not Anglo-Saxon. It's French, it's Italian, it's Dutch, it's Danish, if you like, but it is the European Enlightenment which actually gave value to historical objects. Historicism, as it was said, and the narrative theory, semiology, for example, they all generated from this geography. But then, obviously, like Turkey, we use this and we adapt this theory, if you like, and we try to organize exhibitions, but the point of view is always limited in your criticism with the Western Prof. We cannot avoid that because that's the birthplace of this institution. Unlike hospitals, unlike schools, unlike parliament buildings, unlike governmental buildings, museums, they are doomed to be European in that sense. But collection-wise, obviously, when you go to China, if you work on ceramics, for example, you have to go to China. But the best ceramics, Chinese ceramics, are in the Victoria Albert Museum. But what happens, what happens in Iraq? What happens in our geography is also very scary sometimes. We scare ourselves. I get very scared when I think, God forbid, anything happens. Then how are we going to protect them? In Egypt, maybe you remember those pictures, around the museums, scholars were holding hands and they made a human chain to protect the museums. So it's a very delicate, our geographies are very delicate geographies in that sense. But I know what you mean and I accept the criticism. It's limited in the Western. That's true. Any objections to what I do? My husband has objections to what I do. As you Marxist husbands.
Elit kurumlara karşı değil.
Thank you very much for joining us. It was very interesting speech.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.